So, in case you're wondering how Tesla is doing versus the Magnificent Seven, from which it has now been delisted, and the Magnificent Seven is called the Magnificent Six, well, let's just see how it's doing compared to its the other members of that group. We're just going to look at the last decade. Now, I didn't pull this together. John Ehrlichman, Jon Ehrlichman, that's how he goes on. It's his handle, also apparently his name. Anyway, it turns out that Apple has doubled in value over that same time period. Do you know that Microsoft has tripled in value over that same period? When we get to Amazon, it is up 626% compared to where it was just a decade ago. But then you get to Meta. Meta is up 1,357%. And then there's NVIDIA. Oh my gosh. In just one decade, it's gone up 27 times what it was just 10 years ago. But then sadly, there's Tesla. It's only gone up 33 times, 34 times actually. 3,333%, 34 times since one decade ago. Yeah, you know, that Elon Musk, he just hasn't done that much for Tesla in that 10 years. Okay, so now let's get on to the story of the day, which is that 12.4.1 is now out there and folks are driving it around and we're getting some reports. And let's see, let me read some of these reports to you and then I'll give you my overall impression. Dirty Tesla says that 12.4.1 is maybe around 2 times fewer disengagements. In his initial testing, he had only one disengagement that was necessary, although minor, had to do with the speed limit. The entire drive, I didn't need to touch the wheel one time, quite the improved experience versus wheel nag. And that's what everybody's talking about. Getting rid of the wheel nag is such a big deal. He says, on another trip, he says, I did have several interventions on another trip, 3 times severely slowing and stabbing at brakes for blinking yellow lights and needed an accelerator push. So not sure 100% what that exactly means. I'm just reporting. FSD does not know what speed limit ends mean. So it tried to drive 35 miles an hour in a 55 zone for many miles, required many accelerator presses. AI should be able to read and use that sign appropriately as well. One time he needed an accelerator press when the car didn't want to go from a stop sign for a huge gap in high-speed cross traffic. Overall, the drive was extremely comfortable and confident, but still needed some help. All right, this is from Black Tesla. He, by the way, goes his handle on X as BLKTSLA. All right, he says, FSD 12.4.1 observation from first drive highlights no steering wheel nag is a game changer. Number 2, lots of good from 12.3.6 carryover. He says there's a new indicator, a green dot. Vision monitoring is not overly sensitive, he says, and it uses more caution overall on this particular version. Bloomberg says Model 3 now costs less. I'm sorry, new story. So overall, this was a couple, I'm just reading you a couple out of dozens, not dozens, I would say maybe about 8 that I looked at today. And all of them were saying that it is better, has some benefits, of course, as with major, and Elon said this is a major change. So as with all major changes, there were some setbacks also. And, you know, you've heard some of them there, just straight up reporting. All right, Bloomberg now says that the Model 3 costs less than a comparable gas vehicle. He's saying that about not only the Model 3, but also the new Kia and also one of the Chevys, all 3. This is very subjective. They're comparing these based on the average price that people pay for a car, which is now like $47,000. So the Model 3 is way below that. Model Y is even below that. Anyway, I'd say instead of doing it that way, put it up against any other car that's remotely in the price range. You know, there's lots of cars out there that you can get that information, even after discounts that might be given at the dealer, and come up with, you know, some 3 or 4 cars that are ballpark around the Model 3 or the Model Y, and then makes them actually look at the specs. And no ICE car will come close to competing in safety. No ICE car will come close to the after purchase costs, like, I don't know, the energy division, the energy portion with electricity versus gasoline. None of them will come close in comfort to the new Model 3. None of them are going to have the same usable life, and all kinds of extras related to the app, to computerization, to the entertainment systems, to over-the-air updates where the car just keeps getting better and better. And I'm going to bet I'm going to make this assessment. I think I'm going to be true. Once we get over all of the nonsense of the ups and the downs that have come as a result of COVID and the economy and how that's impacted the resale values of vehicles, I am going to make you a bet that a year from now, when we start looking at resale values again, when we get back to some kind of normal, I'm going to suggest that the Teslas will have a much higher resale value again, as they did prior to all the craziness that went on with COVID. All right, now we've got Tesla Patriot. He says, listen, I finally decided what question I will ask at the shareholder event if I get the chance. And this is the question. Trump has recently changed his tune and last week said that he's now a fan of electric vehicles and he's also a fan of you, meaning Elon Musk. And he says, what do you tell him, Elon? What do you say? How do you respond to that? I added some stuff in there just to make it a little more clear. All right, so that was a great question. Alex Voigt, Alex underscore Voigt. I'm sorry, Avoigt, A-V-O-I-G-T, Avat. Anyway, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. VW redirects 60 billion euros into ICE development. This is, let me read it again. Wait a minute. There's got to be a problem here. VW redirects. Okay, so this is money that was intended to go into BEV development. They've redirected 60 billion euros into ICE development. The VW Group announced that one third of its $180 billion euro BEV investment program will now be invested in ICE technology. According to Antlitz, the future is still electric, but at the same time, the past is not over yet. It is a third and will remain a third. The company should keep its combustion cars competitive instead of phasing them out of the CFO, said the CFO and COO, gets both titles. However, Antlitz emphasized the future is still electric. Only the past is not over yet. What we're seeing is the legacy car manufacturers diverting planned investment into BEV that was intended for BEVs into ICE technology because they want to maximize short-term profits. But in doing so, they are limiting their ability to deliver competitive BEVs in the future. The question is not if VW's ICE past is not over yet, but what is VW's future? So this is Randy Kirk. By the way, in case you haven't figured that out, please hit the like button. It's always helpful. Please subscribe. I need way more subscribers right now. I normally get about 1,000 new subscribers every 5-6 weeks. That has dropped off. Must be because the same old gang is being the same old gang. But maybe if I could get a few more subscribers out of the same old gang, then the algorithm would go further out and grab in some new players, and some of those new players would come in. We get that subscription thing going again. Anyway, whatever the causes are, if you'd subscribe, that'll just be one more. And then notify, you want to hit notify because you know what happens on Sunday night. Now, there will be a program on Sunday morning, and there might even be one at Sunday noon or 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. I'm not sure. But what there will be is Sunday night, which we call Monday morning. It is going to be the show of all times. You're going to have to watch that Sunday night program tomorrow night called Monday Morning because the setup for next week is the biggest setup I think I've ever seen in 60 years of watching the markets. I mean, there's so much happening next week. It is absolutely mind-boggling. So that show is going to be, you got to watch it. That's when you want to watch for. Okay. And then, of course, join Patreon. I would love it if you would join Patreon. That'd be so kind of you. I really need a lot of kind folks to step up and join Patreon. All right. We have got the 𝐂𝐫𝐢𝐜 letter saying that the Russell 2000 compared to the S&P 500, that ratio is now at the lowest level since October 2001. In other words, small caps I'm so sorry. In other words, small caps are the cheapest relative to large caps in 23 years. Over the last decade, the S&P 500 has rallied 178%, outperforming the Russell 2000 gain of 108%. Not bad though for 10 years to go up 108%. Year to date, small caps are up just 2%. That's not very good compared to the 12% surge in the S&P 500, which of course is 93%. I think it's 93% comes from the top 4 or 5, 6 stocks. Anyway, either small caps are he says, and this is the problem with 𝐂𝐫𝐤𝐜. I like you, 𝐂𝐫𝐤𝐜. I love the stats that you bring to my attention, but then you come up with these conclusions. He says either small caps are undervalued or large caps are overvalued. That does not follow. It's not even logical. I think you can figure that out for yourself, but let me explain it. Small caps could be valued exactly right for the time, for now, for this environment, for this macro, for those companies that are in it. And large caps could be valued exactly correctly. And it's just that for this time, for the situation that we're in right now, this divergence has happened because you've got these 6 stocks that are just massive. They're just the amount of profits and cash flow that they're throwing off is on a level that, well, we've never seen before. We have two $3 trillion companies now and a couple of $2 trillions, and got a bunch of more that are headed that way. So anyway, sorry, I don't agree, 𝐂𝐫𝐤𝐜, but I love your stats. What a great job you do on stats. Business Insider. Okay, so some economic data is starting to sour, and a recession threatens to catch investors sleeping, says Albert Edwards, the Societe Generale strategist, who was one of those who called the dot-com bubble. He says proper equity bear markets falls of 30%. I thought it was 20%. But anyway, he says a proper equity bear market of a drop of 30%, which Larry and I talked about this morning in terms of a 20% is, I would say, reasonably likely. Over 20%, I don't think so. Anyway, only really occur in recessions. So that is when equity investors fear most, as a recession that might result in a 30% drop. This is especially against expectations of continued economic recovery, Edwards wrote. Edwards said that there are a couple of warning signs that a recession could be on our doorstep. Here they go. The first is that GDP expectations have recently cratered. The Atlanta Fed's GDP Now model dropped Q2 expectations to 1.8 on June 3rd from 3.4 a week earlier. But the model's estimates then jumped back to 3.1 a couple of days later after the Friday jobs report, and could easily drop down. He doesn't say this is me. And they could easily drop back down next week with all the stuff that's going to be happening next week. And then change again a couple of more times. So this, what they call it, the GDP Now or something, this regular reporting by the Atlanta Fed jumps all over the place based on the data of the day. So it's not that helpful. But what was helpful is seeing that the first quarter got revised from a 1.8 to a 1.3, I believe it was. Or it was a 1.6 to 1.3. But anyway, whichever it was, got revised down and ended up at this like 1.3. That tells me, because I don't see second quarter being higher, the second quarter is probably going to be 1% or less when all is said and done. And then you're looking at possibly 0 or negative in the third quarter. Because why? I've said it 1,000 times, but there's probably new people watching. And the reason is because last year, third quarter was extremely strong due to government spending increases, not just government spending, but dramatic increases quarter over quarter, year over year by the US government, and those will not be equal this year. So where is the increase going to come from this year? Not going to come from the consumer, and that's 70% of the business. It's not going to come from business, which is 15%. They're not going to be spending tons more. So where's it going to come from? All right. Even though projections have bounced back over the last few days, Edwards said, the GDP, he said, Edwards showed that GDP tracks very closely with the Institute for Supply Management's new order data. Never heard this before, which has recently slid. That's an interesting one. Current levels suggest GDP growth could be slow to under 1% in the months ahead. There you go. As GDP growth disintegrates, equity investors should be worried that recession might just arrive after all. If a recession does unfold, Edwards also argued that the notion that the Fed can prevent a stock market crash through rate cuts is just not true. Even if Armageddon looms, I guarantee that the investment era will be filled with the sounds of bulls singing their soft landing siren songs, he said. And beyond that, I can also guarantee you that you will hear that any recession will be shallow, as the Fed has ample firepower to slash rates, just as they always did in the past recessions, even though they never prevented a collapse in the equity market ever. So finally, it says the recession in the months ahead would certainly catch investors by surprise. According to an April Wall Street Journal survey of economists, the U.S. has only a 29% chance of entering a recession over the next year. Compare that to the 61% that economists assigned just a year and a half ago in January 2023. By the way, the 29% chance of entering a recession, for me, that's my number right now, but also it's not for the full year, it's for just the next quarter, the third quarter. But is a recession really taking shape? Some traditional indicators say so, including the Conference Board's leading economic index, which has been saying so for 2 years, the Treasury yield curve, which has been saying so for 2 years, and both of those have a perfect track record of signaling downturns over the last several decades. But as pointed out by Larry and I, again, if you didn't see that show this morning, you missed a good one. Go back and look, and that is that usually the recession starts about the time that inversion curve starts to collapse back to normal. However, economic data is mixed at the moment. On one hand, the U.S. economy added 275,000 jobs in May, smashing expectations. Inflation also remains above 3%, indicating that consumer demand is hanging on. On the other side of the coin, the unemployment rate rose to 4.1, which this huge divergence between the two ways of seeing the employment picture, and that apparently caused by lots and lots of people having 2 jobs. The year-over-year percentage change of unemployed persons, which takes labor participation rates out of the question, is also at levels consistent with a downturn. Job openings data also disappointed earlier this month, hitting the lowest levels since 2021. In short, there are plenty of signs that the economy is slowing down, but whether or not it will continue to slow, to what degree, and how the Federal Reserve adjusts remains to be seen. As Edwards says, though, what really matters for investors is how things turn out relative to expectations. Is how things turn out relative to expectations. And right now, the latter, the expectations are sky high, which is one of the reasons why I'm saying we're going to get a 10%, definitely going to get a 10% correction soon, very soon. And then it might go to 20%, which is the old, I believe, what everybody thinks is a bear market when it hits 20%. And I don't see that as being that hard. And I think it'll be quick. I think you'll see 10% down. It'll just take a couple of weeks or something. And then maybe it kicks back up again or just stays flat for a while. And then anyway, but I think it'll be quick. It won't take like weeks for that 10% to materialize. From Market Watch, in his last remarks before Fed officials stopped giving speeches last week, Powell said he expects inflation will move down on a monthly basis to the lower readings seen in the second half of last year. In other words, Powell believes that inflation will continue down as we continue through the year, but he doesn't believe it's going to get lower than the numbers at the end of last year, when they started signaling a future possible, this is Randy talking, a future possible cut. And he said, that's a notable shift in messaging, Ellen Zentner, chief U.S. economist at Morgan Stanley, said. Fed officials most often speak about inflation on a 12-month rate. Even their inflation target is set on a 2% annual rate. Economists know that the annual rate of inflation won't make much progress this year. That's because the monthly readings, listen to this, here we go. That's because the monthly readings will have to compare with lower inflation readings of the second half of last year. So the annual rate won't come down much, even if the monthly data approves. The annual rate won't come down very much, even if the monthly rate does well. So Zentner said Powell is signaling the Fed will be looking at sequential improvements. Now, he said this before. Meyer put it this way: the Fed will want to see that the 6-month inflation rate is below the 12-month inflation rate and that the 3-month rate is below the 6-month rate. And Powell has talked many times about how important the 6-month rate is. He hasn't mentioned the 3-month rate that I remember, but how important that 6-month rate is. If the data come in that way, the Fed will be able to cut rates starting in September. This will be followed by cuts at every meeting through mid-2025, she said. I do not agree at all. I think that there will not, I just continue to say that unless there's an emergency, and again, we talked about this again, something else Larry and I talked about at length, so I won't go into it again in detail, but the Fed will not take the risk of looking political with a cut in September unless there's an emergency. If there's a big jobs number like 4.3 or 4.4 or something like that percent in terms of jobs unemployment number, if there's a month over 2 months over, like 2 months in a row with 50,000 people in increase in employment, if there is inflation has dropped down to 1.5% or something like that. I mean, if there is some urgency and some very obvious stats that give them room to do it before the election, they might. I'm saying the real next decrease, assuming good numbers between now and then, will be November. All right, this is from Ryan, of course, Core Research. So the handle, I'm sorry, Beyond Core Research, BIN Core, CORE, Search, SEARCH. That's the handle on X. The street is throwing in the towel on a cut this summer. I've been throwing in the towel on any cuts this year for months. Sometimes when you guys, there's only 4 of you that get on my case for some missed decision or missed projections that I've made. But I want you to keep in mind all the really big ones that I've gotten right, like no recession last year. Yeah, that's what I said. Like inflation coming down last year. Yeah, that's what I said, in the face of everybody else saying the opposite. Oh, and then this year saying no cuts. I've been saying no cuts for about 4 months now. No cuts this year. Well, everybody's talking about 5 and 3 and blah, blah, blah. I've been saying no cuts this year. But maybe in November, that would be the earliest time. And that there's only a 30% chance of recession. I've moved that around for a week or 2 weeks. I think I was saying a 60% chance of recession, but then I got new data and pulled it back down to 30%. So far, I think I'm doing okay. So JP Morgan changed their first Fed rate cut view to November from July. Citi changed their Fed rate cut forecast to September from July. And September at this point being a coin toss, they said. So there you go. That's what some of the other big boys are saying right now about what's going to be happening. Yeah, so let's see. What do I have to say? That's about all I have to say, except that we will have a show tomorrow morning for sure. Not sure what that's going to be yet. I'll figure it out shortly. And then, you know what I might do? I might put together my list of questions that I would ask if I were asked any questions in Austin, and I won't be asked because I won't be there. Anyway, and then tomorrow night, of course, we've got, again, you got to watch that show. Do not miss tomorrow night. It's gonna be a lot of fun to do, and you'll be able to tell that I'm having fun. Anyway, and then for sure, I mentioned it only 4 or 5 times. Larry and I had an amazing show this morning. He and I agreed at the end of the show that we had a lot of fun doing it. So I'm hoping that you enjoyed it as well if you did watch it. And actually, a number of people said that we seem to be enjoying it. So if you didn't see it, it was chock full of really, really critical economic information and stuff about Tesla. So go back and check out there, right there is the card. And then, so until tomorrow morning, it has been great talking to you. Can't find the box.